What's up, chat? How's it going? We're live doing some talking about some Tyranids today. I got a couple things to go over. I played another tournament this weekend. Wanted to go over all my games. And I thought it would be interesting to go over all of the recent Tyranid lists, or the archetypes that are being played right now, because there's so much innovation and interesting things going on from Warzone Octarius, and I think it's going to be, we should talk about them. We should rate them. We should do a pretty sick tier maker list. So I've got that all set up today. I even made a PowerPoint today, chat. So it's it's getting real, okay? I think it's important to know how much work went into today's presentation. It's going to be pretty intense. Everyone, watch out. All right. How's it going, everyone in chat? Hope everyone had a good weekend. We weren't live yesterday. In fact, I had a T5S2 finals game streamed over on the Twitch. If you're not over there, twitch.tv/tacticaltortoisetv. Check it out. I've been literally streaming basically nonstop over there for the last couple of days, because I have a bunch of list deadlines coming in, and I'm trying to play with new and interesting Tyranid lists, different archetypes and varieties of the core, the core Tyranid list. And I've been practicing and grinding a ton of games over there. Plus, we had this T5S2 finals yesterday. But that means that we can talk today, so that's fun. Before we get started, I do want to remind everyone, today's the last day of November, and that means it's the last day to sign up for our giveaway. I've got two of these bad boys. These Black Templar Army boxes. Hopefully that shows up in the camera. There it is. Hey, look at it. There we go. You can see the camera even there, in there even. That's exciting. I got two of these guys. We're giving them away to people who hang out on the channel and do stuff. There's a billion ways to enter, and you can check it out. Exclamation point giveaway in the chat will get you the link there, and then you can go enter yourself to win one or maybe even two Black Templars armies. Just kidding. You'll win one, but two people will win one. So that's very exciting. Anyway, let's talk about some games. Let's start with the tournament that I played this weekend. Just a little RTT. But I was grinding a bunch of games, trying to find a list I wanted to play that wasn't Harridan. Eventually, I just decided to play Harridan. And man, am I glad I played Harridan. So far, the list hasn't really changed since Octarius came out. I've actually been very happy with it, and I'm playing around with a couple of different little tweaks and stuff, but I haven't really found any that I liked. One thing that could get switched up is adding some Devourer Termagants into the list, or additional Gene Stealers, potentially. That would be to shore up the Drukhari matchups, and so the Drukhari Artists of the Flesh lists are very powerful, and I think against a list like Hive Guard, specifically, plus potentially Harridan, the damage reduction, mass damage reduction across the entire army is pretty difficult to get through. So mass 1 damage attacks is probably the way to go. How that exactly looks, I'm not 100% sure, but until we figure it out, game plan might be to dodge the matchup. The Harridan does do a bunch of damage to them, but just because he's kind of a relatively low volume, high damage attacks, the 5+ damage ignore, sinking additional attacks into Talos and Kronos and Grotesques just makes the fight really super awkward. So that's it is what it is. It's PowerPoint, so we're not Auspex Tactics. It's not a white background PowerPoint, if that helps, everyone. I hope that helps. I put a video in my PowerPoint chat. Look! Tyranid Prime list looks cool, but the Harridan is great. Yeah, I think there's more play to be had with the Tyranid Prime. Not sure if I like the Tyranid Prime plus Harridan list. I'm not 100% sure that the combo with the Tyranid Prime plus the Gene Stealers is worth removing, your other HQ choice, basically. I don't think Tyranid Prime by himself is worth the Focal Essence, or the Unchecked Rage. I think you need, there's a critical mass of Gene Stealers or Hormagaunts or something in your list that you want to be putting that buff on for the Tyranid Prime to be worth it. I'm not 100% sure. But, man, I love this little Nergothrope who's in here right now. He's doing great. But, anyway, you can get the list, by the way, if you want to. Exclamation point list in the chat will get you a link to the Harridan list that I'm playing right now. And this is the one I'm playing in the video. Round 1, played Retrieval Mission. This was against a Death Guard list, a bit of an interesting Death Guard list. I think it was mostly I think mostly what my opponent had. It was kind of a Death Guard stuff list. It had a big unit of Blight Lord Terminators, which is a unit that I do actually like. I think they're pretty cool. And realistically, I think that they're supposed to be kind of the range battery that the faction's built around. Obviously, Volkite Contemptors sort of took over from them. I think Games Workshop maybe forgot that they'd printed Volkite Contemptors, and the Blightlord Terminators were supposed to be this like bulwark unit that just pours bolter fire into things. But once you get all the wombo combos off on them, they go absolutely crazy. You make their bolters into plague weapons, and you reroll with Arch Contaminator. You get +1 to wound. You get the exploding 6s, +1 to hit from the Tallyman, and the unit just like peels vehicles off the table and stuff. It's all very cool. That's what my opponent was doing. It's a little bit less cool against the Harridan. So we played Retrieval Mission. I can grab the secondaries that we picked. I don't believe, because the terrain was relatively light, we did count these were buildings here were all obscuring. Actually, almost everything was obscuring besides the forests. So there was a lot of line of sight blocking, but it wasn't in like super relevant positions. And that meant that I wasn't very... I was pretty sure my infantry was going to die. So I didn't end up going with Raise the Banners High. I think I ended up going with a good old Retrieve Octarius Data. Oh, I don't know if I took down my score sheet for this one. I apologize, everyone. And I did take Assassinate alongside Engage in All Fronts because my opponent had a million characters, a lot of the little tiny characters. I think there's even a Biologist Putrefier in there. Overall, I ended up going first, which is obviously very good. The game wasn't super close. My opponent had a unit of Mephitic Blighthaulers. I was worried about shooting at the Hive Guard. The Hive Guard were sort of protected by the building that was back here. The Hive Guard are over here. BT dubs. I was worried about the Blighthaulers moving laterally to get lines of sight into them, so I just ripped them off the table immediately. My opponent, moved up aggressively with the blow drones. Unfortunately, he couldn't, because all of his stuff is like kind of different speeds, everything sort of staggered its movement. So the Harridan knocked both blow drones out and then was able to focus fire on the Blightlords and kill them, and ended up taking the game down with a pretty solid, a resounding win. The Harridan going ham all over my opponent's army. We did have a good fight over here with the Gene Stealers versus a unit of Possessed, as well as the characters. The Gene Stealers ended up winning, but he did kill most of the Gene Stealers. And he killed most of my front line. I think all my warriors had died standing on objectives, and all my rippers had died. So he killed my utility stuff. But the Harridan and the Hive Guard stayed strong, as they do, and that took us out to the win. Now, round 2 was an absolutely sick game. I was playing against a Brady, who I've actually played against a lot of times, and in a lot of the games that I have talked about on stream, I played against him in a lot of them. Somehow we keep getting paired up, but he typically plays Custodes and has elected to, I think rightfully, switch into Grey Knights and has been seeing some success. Big shocker, 5 Nemesis Dread Knights is pretty good. So I knew this was going to be a tough game. I played this matchup a bunch of times, and it is... Somehow I've gone first every time, but I haven't wanted to go first every time. But 5 Nemesis Dread Knights, you definitely want to go first. And it is a hair-raiser of a matchup, for sure. It's a really tough one. I think it's kind of split right down the middle. I think both armies have good answers to each other, and that makes the game really dynamic. The one thing that's a little bit awkward is if you don't have a really super good defensive position for Hive Guard, and your opponent can teleport Shunt or Gate of Infinity a Dread Knight like into your backline, get all the buffs off, shoot the Hive Guard. It goes very south very quickly. Fortunately, I won the roll to go first, though, so my opponent didn't get a chance to do that. So that's how we do. It does require you to play pretty forward with the utility units. So as you can see, I have my Rippers up in the front here to screen out turn 1 deep strikes. I basically can't stop him from shooting my stuff, but at least I can stop him from charging my stuff. But it does mean that you run out of utility units pretty quickly. And that's one of the strengths of Grey Knights is, they have the threat of that teleport Shunt every turn you have to be worried about. And so you have to give them things to attack, and they'll just do that. We were on priority targets today, so we both had our priority targets objective, which ends up being very good because Grey Knights have some absolutely phenomenal secondaries, obviously, with their own Ritual Purification. And that having access to priority targets to combat that is a pretty big deal. So we both took priority targets. We both took Retrieve Octaria's data. I took Engage in all fronts. My opponent took Ritual. And we were off to the races. Now, I ended up winning the roll to go first. Like I said, here's a really blurry pic of my opponent's army. That's embarrassing. Professional photographer, I am not. Okay, so I didn't take a picture. I think this is top of turn 1. So after my first turn. My opponent also had his pregame redeploy, so redeploy 2 core units at the start of the game. And one thing I will note about this list is a pretty interesting list. It was 50% Sword Bearers, so we get the +1 to wound on the Dread Knights. But the other was Prescient Brethren, so we weren't seeing any Rapiers in this list. It was the Prescient Brethren to give the Dread Knights that aren't in Sword Bearers the reroll once to hit and wound strat, and then you also get CP regen. And we're seeing a lot of Prescient Brethren pop up in these Grey Knight lists, which I think is really good. My opponent did have the redeploy. He elected to pop a Dread Knight behind these boxes over here so that it was out of line of sight of everything, or most things, I think. He had a Nemesis Dread Knight. This one has Servant of the Throne, and or a Grandmaster, excuse me, and a Grandmaster on the other side. This one has Exigence. So this one could redeploy teleport, and the other one could get its 3+ invulnerable save. What I ended up doing is splitting my attacks to force him to use all of his once per game triggers immediately, essentially. I fired one gun from the Harridan into one of the Grandmasters and one gun into the other one who ended up being placed over here. The Exigence one, interestingly, and I think my opponent admitted that this was a mistake, the Exigence Nemesis Grandmaster teleported to behind this piece of terrain here. So I couldn't draw line of sight to it with the Harridan, but the thing there is that because there were 2 Grandmasters, he couldn't have Exigence plus Servant of the Throne on a single Grandmaster, and that meant that the Grandmaster, as soon as it Exigence, as long as it doesn't leave the range of Hive Guard, you get to double tap it with Hive Guard, which means that your opponent, essentially, the only option, if the Harridan can draw a bead to the Exigence Grandmaster on the top of turn 1, or on turn 1, the only option your opponent has if the Hive Guard haven't shot yet is to teleport away, because if he teleports forward, the Hive Guard will just kill him. And it turns out that's what ended up happening. So the Harridan got souped up, +1 to hit, +1 damage, +1 wound, everything going on. I don't think I exploded 6s. I might have exploded 6s on the Hive Guard. But we popped the Servant of the Throne on this guy. He took minimal damage, and then we popped the Sigil of Exigence over here, and I think the Harridan ended up retargeting to one of the Dread Knights in the back here and tooling up for a little bit. I don't believe I killed it. That meant that then the Hive Guard could retarget and fire into this guy and absolutely obliterate him with the Relentless Flurry. So we were Sigil of Exigence Grandmaster off the table. I double moved the Ripper Swarms into my opponent's table quarter to get engaged on all fronts. We did some screening out over here. I got a unit of Warriors in the back, unit of Ripper Swarms on the side to stop anybody from popping in and getting good shots into the Hive Guard. You could get okay shots with a teleport shot, but not great shots. The downside of the 5 Dread Knight list is that I think you run out of teleport homers, I think, pretty quickly. My opponent also didn't have Drago. He had a Tech Marine for +1 to hit, and he had a Captain as well, a Brother Captain, alongside those Grandmasters to fill up the HQ slots. Now, the other thing that I did here is I placed the Neurothrope, if you see, in front of the Harridan. That means that my opponent has to walk into the 4+ deny range in order to get the +1 to wound or +1 damage spells on the Harridan. So even if he, teleport shunts one thing, Gate Infinity is another thing, tries really hard to go for the Harridan, it's going to be really tough because one of those spells is most likely going to get shut down. Because I have enough denies in the area, or I had one deny in the area at least, and then I have the 4+ deny for one of the 2, basically, whichever one went off without being denied. So I have pretty good psychic defenses on the Harridan, and then I'm able to catalyst him on top of that. On the flip side, my opponent did come in. He ended up making a good play here to kill this Ripper Swarm that I had in the middle. That was screening out some good drops from his interceptors. He ended up killing them. He had an Ethereal Castigation from one of the interceptor units to shoot at it, left, I think, one Ripper Swarm alive just barely because they were in cover. That let the second Interceptor squad shoot it to kill it, and then that let him port the Dread Knight to where the Interceptors were. To where the Ripper Swarms were. That allowed the Dread Knight to open up into the stuff inside. I ended up losing the Warrior unit that was here. I lost almost all the Gene Stealers that were in here. He ended up not targeting the Harridan at all. Essentially, I think if you don't go first and you don't get the chance to alpha the Harridan, you mostly just ignore it. He had the Dread Knight over here move up and take some shots into the Rippers and the Warrior that were over here. He ended up killing the Rippers, but I unyielding chitined, and the Warrior over here almost exactly survived, which is a very big deal. Thanks to that -1 damage on the side cannon shots. I think he literally survived on 1 wound after that, so I was feeling pretty good about that single Warrior. Thanks, buddy. Keep the bioweapon bond dream alive. And so I did lose 1 unit of Warriors, but I was able to chain. This guy was over here. He was able to chain back to the Swarmlord who was here, who could chain the bioweapon bond to anywhere else in the army that I wanted him to. My opponent also took the center objective. I was able to run on turn 2, run the Gene Stealers into the center to contest, or to stop my opponent from getting the 15-point primary turn, and then sort of just keep shooting. And I was slowly able to attrition out from there. I don't know. Looks like I think I definitely dropped the ball on taking photos this game, unfortunately. But my opponent was able to get in with a charge. An Interceptor unit from this side got in and was able to charge into the Hive Guard. And he actually made the charge. I think after they just moved forward a couple times, and I wasn't able to deal with them because I was killing the Dread Knights. They were able to get a charge in the Hive Guard. The Hive Guard overwatched because they were Swarm leadered, killed 2 of them, which is a big deal. The Hive Guard attacks themselves. One thing you have, it's easy to forget is that the Hive Guard, when their Swarm leader, the Swarm leader rerolls also affect them in melee. So the Hive Guard actually punched pretty good against T4. And that they actually, I think, killed another model in melee, and that let me smite the unit out of melee, which was a little bit scary there because I could have lost a turn of shooting of the Hive Guard. But that was able to slowly peel my opponent off of this, being able to fight over the center objective, and I was able to move in and clear his stuff out in the late game. So essentially, he was scoring pretty heavily on Ritual. He ended up with 12 points on the Ritual because he lost it out last turn. I was able to attrition him out last turn. But he was really putting a lot of primary objective pressure on me. He dropped me down to 5 points on round 2 because he was able to clear out this objective. Although from there, I was able to come back. And that ended up being an 88-68 game. So relatively close. It is priority target, so we both get a lot of points on secondaries. But going first definitely helps against Grey Knights because that turn 1 deep strike is absolutely brutal. if you don't have a perfect place to hide your Hive Guard. Now, I almost wonder if, had I lost turn 1, I dumped the Hive Guard back here. I'm not sure that he could get line of sight and range anywhere to them. So I think that was probably going to be the play. But obviously, I lose all the Gene Stealers and I lose all my front line. Just for freezies, basically, and I have to fight back from there. And I don't think it's the end of the world or anything. I think that game could go either way from there, but I do think it's a little bit tougher if you go second for sure. Check, you give Harridan a relic? No. He's full of character, but they forgot to give him the character keyword, so... No, you can only give him adaptive physiologies, which is why you give him Dermic Symbiosis for the 5+ invulnerable save. So that was a sick game. Definitely a hair-raiser of a game. And that moved me on to the finals. I actually ended up playing against Knights. We had 3 undefeated, and the other undefeated player was playing the Drukhari Artist of the Flesh list. And I was pretty afraid of that list, obviously. I didn't have the Devoured Termagants in my army. And I don't think the Harridan himself kills through that list. I haven't played the matchup out yet. I'll have to play it. I think you can blow up one, Talos brick or brick of grotesques or something with the Gene Stealers, and you can blow up one of them per turn with the Harridan. Unfortunately, the Hive Guard don't really do any damage. If you have the Devourer Termagants, they can trade for a unit of something, or potentially even 2 grotesque units. But I think you eventually get run over because you don't quite have the attack volume you need to get through that army with the Harridan. The Harridan's much better against single heavily armored targets, which is good because in my final round I played against Knights. And this Knights list was actually sick. It had, I'm gonna double check my pronunciation or my nomenclature here. It had an Atropos, I took a picture of the list itself. Yeah, the list itself is absolutely gorgeous. Look at these guys. Look at these decals and this battle damage. They looked absolutely awesome. And he had the Atropos over here all posed up on a piece of rubble. This is the terrain. That's not the base, but I have a better picture of him later on. But an absolutely gorgeous list. Only 5 models. We had 1 Knight Megara, the Castellan over here, as well as the Atropos. 2 Armigers, 1 both Moiraxes, 1 with double lightning locks for the Tesla, and 1 of them with a grav cannon, I think, or a grav bombard, and a siege cloth with the rad cleanser. So 2 little guys to give objective secured out when you need them, and then the big guys to stomp around. And he was playing a free blade lance. He had it so most of the big knights were also objective secured, just thanks to their warlord traits and their the household benefits. But unfortunately, the burdens actually hurt him a little bit in this game. So we can see this is the deployment. Obviously, my opponent basically, we're playing sweep and clear, so 5 objectives. We have these the awkward corner deployments over here, and my opponent basically just, mostly deployed sort of on the line in areas where his knights could actually move through the ruin terrain here. We were considering all of these big pieces of terrain as ruins, so they were all obscuring, and they didn't necessarily impede the knights on the bases, so they could walk through the bases, but obviously the 3-dimensional pieces of the terrain would block them. They'd have to move over those. These little lava pits in the back were dense cover, so those were essentially forests, basically. It was kind of an approximation of a US Open style map, but obviously they were, instead of being squares, they were irregular shapes, and there weren't any walls on them, which made things a little bit awkward. We can see there's no Harridan on the table here, and that's because we set up my army in as defensive a position as possible, and then immediately lost the roll to go first, which means the Harridan, just right off the table, it goes into strategic reserve. He's like, I want nothing to do with an entire knight army shooting at me with no catalyst up. No, thank you, sir. So this was kind of a trial by fire, because I wasn't super confident how well the Harridan list was into knights going second. I knew the Harridan's super powerful in the matchup, but you lose an entire round of board presence from, having him on the table and being able to kill your opponent's models. That said, much better to have him on turn 2 than not have him at all. So still feel pretty good about the ability to do that. My opponent moved up relatively aggressively into the center of the table. As we can see, the Atropos, he had a warlord trait for a 6-inch heroic intervention, just dominating the central objective. Megara moving around the side to try to get lines of sight through here. He ended up tooling up the Hive Tyrant over here, killed, I think this was after we took this picture, killed most of this warrior unit, killed my Ripper Swarms over here as well. And basically, the Castellan poor Castellan ended up just basically killing whatever else was in line of sight. So he ripped up a unit of Rippers on turn 1, and I think this unit of Gene Stealers on turn 2. Now, my opponent had ended up on his top of one. He had advanced one of the Moiraxes to this objective to try to lock that one in, and then he got, obviously, the big knights on all 3 of the other objectives, so he was angling for locking in 3 objectives for 15 pointers. I ended up taking a shot with the Hive Guard into the Atropos. He rotated Iron Shields, and I dinged it up a little bit with smiting from the character brick in the back here. I ended up dealing, I think, on all told, about 10 damage to it between the Hive Guard shot and the smites, and then I ended up redirecting a Hive Guard shot into the Moirax that was here. I didn't quite kill it. I left it on just a couple just a couple wounds. The Gene Stealers got double moved in and charged it to clear it, so my opponent didn't also lock that objective. And he rolled absolutely lights out with the Rad Cleanser, killed like 5 of them or something. On top of the unit, I think, already being hit by the lightning locks. I think the lightning lock guy had gotten line of sight to one Gene Stealer back here and killed like 6 of them. So there's only 4 left of the unit after all that happened, which is very sad. They were able to exactly kill the Moirax. I think the Hive Guard shot had left it on 3, and they were able to exactly kill it. And I ended up overrunning them back in order to stop any position where the Atropos could move in and touch this piece of terrain to shoot at the Hive Guard. So I don't believe that there was quite enough room for the base to fit through here, so he couldn't have touched this corner, and he would have had to get a little bit too far to touch this corner. So we were trying to stop him from getting line of sight to the Hive Guard, because I needed this Hive Guard to attrition him down. Basically, like I said, he ended up tooling up the Hive Tyrant that was here. He killed all the Gene Stealers. He killed... I Unyielding Chitined actually against the Lightning Cannon off the Megara, and left one guy surviving on 1 wound again. So good job, Warriors. You're really nailing it right now to keep that bioweapon bond going. And then we moved on. The Harridan came in. Here's a good picture of the Atropos fighting Swarmlord. Look at this guy. What a freaking sick model, chat. Knight players have the coolest looking armies. Harridan came in, and immediately we'll notice a significant lack of other knights on the table. I elected to... The turn the Harridan came back in, I elected to fire the Hive Guard into the Atropos again. My opponent was low on CP, so he couldn't necessarily... he couldn't sort of autonomically rotate Ion Shields on the Castellan if I elected to shoot it, because it costs 3 CP to rotate a Castellan. So he elected to rotate the Atropos against the Hive Guard shooting. I tooled him up a little bit with the Smites again, and then dumped a Hive Guard shot into him, dropped him down, I think, to 12 or 15 wounds or something like that. And then that meant that the Harridan was open to target whatever it wanted with the Rotate Iron Shields already declared. So he got tooled up for +1 damage, no +1 to hit. We did Exploding Sixes on him, and got +1 to wound, and we just dumped everything into the Castellan and crossed our fingers aggressively and ended up, I think, blowing it up for 32. So we did get there. He did one-shot a Castellan with all of the buffs on him. Good stuff! Pretty proud of Mr. Harridan there. I think my opponent rolled 1 save over, or under what he needed. But it was still a pretty good roll from the Harridan. Hitting on 3s is always a little bit awkward because you can spike 1s and 2s a lot. But I think at the very least we needed to bracket the castle in this turn in order to force my opponent through. To make some hard decisions next turn on how he top brackets anyway. That left the Atropos alive on just a couple of wounds, so Swarmlord went in heroically and cut him into little pieces. With a, I think I was out of CP for a Voracious Appetite, so we just rolled 4s, and he got there. He did it. So proud of you, Swarmlord. That did mean my opponent still had the objectives locked in here, so he was still scoring primary objectives, or these 2 objectives, because Swarmlord had taken that one. He was still scoring primary objectives. Oh, I didn't take another picture. Dang. The Megara ended up coming back and actually just blew Swarmlord to all the way to hell. And then he moved up to take this objective with the Moirax, but the Harridan came over and just blew him up. And that was GG. So it was good to see that the Harridan, I think, is just fine into Knights going second. Outside of having sort of phenomenally beneficial terrain, I'm really not sure what Knights do in this matchup. I think it might just be just one of those things where your opponent, having the ability to potentially kill 2 of them every turn is just too much. And I think that's just it's a weird profile matchup where the Harridan has almost a perfect profile at killing Knights. And that was it. So that actually put me first place in the event. With the pair down, who was the Drukhari player, ended up going 3-0 as well. We ended up splitting the prize pool between us. But congratulations to him. He played against the Grey Knights player actually in the final round, Brady, who I had played against in the previous game. And I guess it didn't go well for Brady, but five Nemesis Dread Knights with those Gatling Silencers just going ham. It feels like could be good, but it sounded like he maybe overextended and didn't anticipate how much damage the Drukhari could potentially do in melee, which is relatively easy to do. All right, chat. But with that, let's move on. And I know we talked about in the title, talking about what the best Tyranid list is, and I might actually cut this segment out to put into a separate video. But what I figure we do today is go through the 6 most common archetypes of Tyranid lists and talk about each one individually. What composes them, or what they're composed of, and how they work, and do a tier list of which one's the best one. So I actually ended up going through and grabbing lists out of recent tournaments, and fix my display capture here a little bit. So grabbing lists that have done well in recent tournaments, and going from there. So I do have a tier maker list up. If I can do this correctly. So here's the six archetypes that I've chosen today to talk about, that we're gonna tier maker our way through. I think there's a couple of variations of Tyranid lists are very much exemplified by kind of the centerpiece of the list. So whether it's a Hive Guard brick and how big that Hive Guard brick is, or a Harridan, or a brick of big monsters, you can classify the different Tyranid archetypes essentially based on what the list focuses on. So in this case, we wanted to talk about 2 versus 3 Hive Guard lists, mid-range lists, which is a Tyranid mid-range. I think that is probably the most common version you'll see right now, which is kind of a mix of, right now it's 1 to 2 Genestealer units, big Genestealer units, 1 to 2 big Devourer Termagant units, 1 Hive Guard unit, and then a kind of smattering of support units to taste. You'll see Hive Tyrants in there, you'll see the Macarons in there sometimes, you'll see Trigons in there sometimes, you'll see a bunch of interesting support options, things like Raveners and Ripper units and stuff like that all see play. A Gant Carpet list, which I think has probably a new lease on life thanks to the Leviathan supplement. I'm not sure it's... Well, we'll talk about exactly how good I think it is. But that's typically going to be a list that focuses specifically on Hormagaunts and Termagants, that is essentially trying to play a primary objective game. Although with the new Leviathan supplement, you can actually wombo combo those units into dealing some reasonable damage, which is not something that this style of Tyranid list has been able to do before. The Harridan list obviously speaks for itself. We just talked for 35 minutes about Harridan and how sweet he is, blowing up knights and stuff. And then obviously a Nidzilla list, which is focused on probably 4+ big monsters, whether that be... there's a couple of varieties. Obviously, you can play with the Hierodules, which are a little bit tankier but a little bit slower, or you can play with Dimacarons or Hive Tyrants, which are a little bit faster but obviously easier to kill. And yeah, as Chance pointing out, basically every version is going to have Swarmlord in it. Swarmlord comes with the territory. I think every list is like Swarmlord and probably 1 unit of Warriors to get +1 to hit or something. That's basically how we're at. So yeah, let's go through it. What do I have at the top of my PowerPoint here? So we can talk about mid-range first. And I pulled some lists I thought were kind of interesting versions of these individual archetypes. This is actually a double Hive Guard list now. I'm looking at it. That's okay. Is this even the right list? Oh no, this is Nidzilla. Just kidding. Nidzilla. All right, that makes sense. So this is a double Hive Guard list, but it's focused really on these 2 barbed Hierodules. We also have a Moloch in there, as well as a Maliceptor to keep it going. Now, the interesting thing about Nidzilla lists is if you're not focused on Dimacarons, you actually don't need Swarmlord. And this is the only list I think we're gonna talk about today that does not have Swarmlord in it. That's because especially the Hierodules are very much kind of a combined arms unit. They have a big gun, and they also have big melee attacks. And they're also relatively fast by themselves. So they just want to like move their full distance up the table, shoot something, and then charge something. And that's the game plan. If you Swarmlord them, they can't shoot. They can charge extra, but that doesn't often make a huge difference. Now, generally, barbed Hierodules are going to be the sort of backbone of these styles of lists right now. Like I mentioned before, you can see them with I guess we should close the tier maker here so we can actually talk about the list. You do see them with Dimacarons pretty often in place of barbed Hierodules, but that's basically the friction between those 2 varieties. you can also say that like a Carnifex list or something like that would fit into this category. Those are significantly less good than the Hyrule. Unfortunate for Carnifexes, but they're pretty bad. Maliceptor, I think, is also an important include. As long as you have an even toughness value, that being toughness 4 or toughness 8, the Maliceptors are really super big deal. Outside of some specific meta considerations, like dealing with Rucka Trucks with your Hive Guard, Maliceptors are good into that. But versus a lot of anti-tank weaponry, the Maliceptor Encephalic Diffusion on a toughness 8 body is effectively -1 to wound. Strength 5 goes down to strength 4, so it's winning on 6s instead of 5s. Strength 9 goes down to strength 8, so it's winning on 4s instead of 3s. And strength 8 goes down to strength 7, so it's winning on 5s instead of 4s. So those being the most common anti-tank firepower in the game, that's a pretty big deal. Obviously, it makes those barbed Hyrules way more difficult to kill. And so this list can either play as kind of a gun line where the Hyrules castle up with Hive Guard. You'll probably usually see Hive Guard in these lists to force your opponent to come in and actually fight with your monsters. Otherwise, they can hide for a lot of the game and shoot them through windows and stuff. But if you have Hive Guard to root them out, that helps a lot. You can castle up with the barbed Hyrules, or you can play them a little bit more aggressively. But either way works, and these lists actually saw a little bit of play pre-Octarius. We saw some triple barbed Hyrule lists, double and triple barbed Hyrule lists doing pretty well. And clearly we're seeing double barbed Hyrule lists still do pretty well. This is from Warzone Atlanta. Price Wilkes went 4-2 at that event with this list bringing 2 barbed Hyrules, which is a pretty good finish for a Nidzilla style of list. Now, the downside, obviously, is that the Nidzilla monsters are a little bit... They're not quite as efficient as, like, a vehicle. You know, we talked about Nemesis Dread Knights for a while when we talked about the tournament today. But those are vehicles that are very hyper-efficient, and the Tyranid monsters, not quite so much. That said, I still think that this variety of Tyranids is going to be a real good one. If we are looking at our tier maker here, I think we'll probably put the Nidzilla somewhere around the C category. And one thing that I should mention is that what we're going to be talking about today is ranking these particular archetypes. In my opinion, if you have a list that doesn't fall into these archetypes, and they are pretty broad spectrum, the definitions we're going to use are pretty loosey-goosey. If your list doesn't fall into one of these archetypes, it's probably going to be below them on the tier. So these aren't necessarily... C tier doesn't necessarily mean that this list is like out of hand, just terrible. But I think it's the lower end of the upper echelon of Tyranid lists. There's a lot of units in the Tyranid Codex that do not make this list, that are not very good. So Nidzilla, I think, is a little bit below average as we're talking about this sort of top tier of competitive stuff, simply because of the fact that the monsters themselves are not particularly efficient. They run into some issues, especially with obscuring terrain. The big 18 wounders like Dimacarons and Hyrules can be seen through terrain, but can't themselves see through terrain, and their bases are fucking huge. They're enormous. So they get, if you have a high density of terrain, they get caught on terrain pretty often. Now, they do have good ranged attacks, so it's not the end of the world. They're not only trying to melee, but you oftentimes will have to supplement them with other stuff. We also see occasionally like big skews of like 6 Hyrules. I don't know if that's really the way to go, but it certainly is cool. We'll move on to our next version here. Our next version of Tyranids. We'll talk about Gant Carpet. And this is I was looking for examples of Gant Carpet that had come out post Octarius, and it's a little bit sparse because a lot of the lists that were previously Gant Carpet turned into more of a mid-range list where they put a bunch of guns in their list. But generally, what you want to do with a list like this is you're focusing it on the very cheap infantry, and you're trying to essentially trade bodies for primary objective points. Now, things have changed significantly because some of the wombo combos in the new Octarius supplement are absolutely phenomenal for dealing damage with these large units. Obviously, the Devourer Termagant unit has been seen a lot, and that's a good example of this. You can, put rerolls on those guys. You can put Onslaught on them so they can advance and shoot. +1 to hit, Tesla-ing 6s, and the amount of damage they deal, especially to 3+ or worse armor save targets. 2+ armor saves, they bounce off pretty easily. But relatively, mediocre to low armor saves targets get shredded. Absolutely shredded. And we do see in this list in particular, behind our tier maker here, this list has a pretty interesting combo of using Hormagaunts with biometallic cysts. So that's going to give them a 6 plus, or that's going to give them +1 AP on their Scything Talons. So all these Scything Talons go to base AP 1. Pack Hunters, so when they outnumber you, they gain an additional AP. So that's going to bring all the Hormagaunts to base AP 2. And then you can use the Hormagaunt Stratagem, which is called... I'm going to find it real quick here, because I just forgot the name of the stratagem, which is very embarrassing. It is called Feral Instincts. It is. Boosh. Improve their AP by an additional 1. So that's going to get them to AP 3. Then we're going to stack on top of that Unchecked Ferocity from the Tyranid Prime to give them automatic wounding on 6s. Now, the downside of Hormagaunts, obviously, is that they are only Strength 3. So unlike Gene Stealers, where you have a bunch of attacks and they're Strength 4, so they're winning a lot of things in 4s or 5s, so you can kind of rely on those wound rolls to get you through a little bit. Strength 3 means you're going to be winning on 5s or 6s almost every time you're going into something. That said, if you are making 60 attacks with this unit of Hormagaunts and 6s of them and 6s automatically wound, you're getting 10 wounds through at AP 3 to start with. Then you get 20 additional hits with rerolls, probably 20 to 30 additional hits you're wounding, so it's probably 15 wounds if you're looking to wound on even just 6s. Or 5s or 6s, is probably 15 to 18 wounds you're expecting out of this Hormagaunt unit, all at AP 3, which means they're going to burn through, 10 intercessors almost, 7 or 8 intercessors with one swing there. And that's with only a 1 CP stratagem on top of these sub-faction traits plus the Synaptic Link off the Tyranid Prime. Now, that gets even crazier if you put them, or... not necessarily crazier, but it changes in tenor a little bit if you put them in a Leviathan detachment, because then you can basically do the same combo that we are talking about with these Devourer Termagants, where you are Teslaing your 6s with full rerolls from Swarm Leader, and you can do that with the Hormagaunt unit. So you're auto wounding on 6s, you're Teslaing 6s, and then you are fishing for those 6s just by re-rolling all of your hit rolls. So with the Swarm Leader on a unit of 30 Hormagaunts, they're attacking 60 times. You should get 10 6s out of the first swing. You're re-rolling those 50 attacks, so you get probably 8 more. That turns into 36 additional hits alongside 18 wounds, which means they're only going to be AP 1 if you used the Hormagaunt Stratagem, Feral Instincts. But that's a boatload. That's 18 wounds in addition to 50-ish regular hits, which means even if you're winning on 6s on a vehicle or something, you're going to be forcing probably 25 to 30 saves on them. Just from this little unit of Hormagaunts. Now, that's we're 2 CP in the hole with that whole wombo combo, but you also have double fights active for those guys, and all those stratagems and abilities are going to be active as well. So these little Hormagaunt units, for significantly cheaper than a big Gene Stealer unit, can deal absolutely insane damage. And the same goes for the shooting variety for those Devourer Termagants as well. So you can build these Gant Carpet styles of army that effectively load CP into the Gaunt cannon and just start blasting people with these incredible combos of damage. On top of that, you have an enormous number of models to take over primary objectives with. And if you are playing in the Leviathan version, you do have the Hive Mind Imperative to double their model count for taking objectives. So even if your opponent is able to deal significant damage back to your units, but isn't able to clear them, a lot of times you can double model count for objectives and either have additional model count for contesting their objectives, or you take the objectives back from them and score 15s on primary at the start of your turn. So I do think that Gaunt Carpet at the top of 9th edition had nothing going for it. It was a terrible archetype. I do think that it is significantly more powerful now than it was with all of these new abilities, especially the Unchecked Ferocity from the Tyranid Prime. Now, the big downsides are that I think the issues with Gaunt Carpet that already exist still exist. So the problems previously were that your units, while they can deal damage, in numbers once you enact all these combos, without all of that support, they don't really do anything, and you're just trading models for victory points, which is good, except that you're not dealing damage to your opponent's army. The other thing is that a lot of these combos are very focused on the single units. Like, you only have one Swarm Leader in your army, so if you want to be full rerolling to get Teslas and stuff like that, you only have one unit you can target with that, which means that if you're trying to spam a bunch of units, you're not going to have the quite the same breadth of threat out of your army that an army like Drukhari would, where they have a lot of units, a lot of these light infantry units, but every single one of them is lethal in and of itself. For Tyranids, you only get one of them that's able to do that sort of insane amount of damage, which means that if you are out of CP or your unit needs to deal damage on the wrong side of the table and they're not near the Swarm Leader, things could go very poorly for you. So I'm going to put Gaunt Carpet at the bottom of the list here for all of these archetypes. I do think that it's an interesting direction that the faction could expand into, and I do think that this technology, this Hormagon technology, using them is basically in the same role that you would typically see Gene Stealers in, but basically as a cheaper, higher volume Gene Stealer. I think that's pretty cool, and I definitely like to see that more often. I'm definitely, at some point, I'm gonna play like a true Gaunt Carpet that's like 2 or 3 big units of Devourer Termagants and like a bunch of Hormagon units, and we're just gonna try to like load one Gaunt unit into the gun, shoot it off, and see what happens. And I do think that this army gets a lot more powerful if you add in indirect fire like Hive Guard and stuff. So your opponent has to come in and allow you to enable all these combos. I think that's also very important. I think there's something there. It sounds fun as hell. But I don't think that it has quite the same power that the other versions have. The other thing right now is that the metagame is not very conducive to Gaunt Carpet. Most armies can kill like 1,000,000 toughness 3 bodies in one go, and so that's not something that you're gonna. Back in 8th edition for a while, having these defensive technologies was a legitimate defense because a lot of armies couldn't clear that many models in one go. But in 9th edition now, they absolutely can, with Blast being in the game, with the base number of attacks and number of that weapons and models make increasing exponentially. It feels like sometimes these big model count armies, I don't think are going to do too well. But that moves us on to our next version of Tyranids. What are we talking about next here? Double Hive Guard. Let's talk about Double Hive Guard. And we got Tyranid Ben up on the screen here today. A list from good old Tyranid Ben. This is from US Open Austin. And see if I can. Yeah, there he is. I guess we can do that. Yeah, that cuts off the bottom of the list. There's no winning here. There he is. 16th place, US Open Austin. He got bottom of the top bracket, but that's still pretty good for Tyranids. And we put 3 Tyranids through into the top 16, if I remember correctly. And Tyranid Ben was one of them, which I was very excited to see. And I've streamed a lot of Tyranid Ben's games from TTS. You can probably find a lot of them over on the Tactical Tortoise TV replay channel. So over Tactical Tortoise TV or youtube.com/Tactical Tortoise TV. We have a lot of Tyranid Ben's games over there, but he's a phenomenal Tyranid player. And bringing an interesting list. So it's a double Hive Guard variety. We do see a Trigon in his version as well as an Exocrine, which has fallen a little bit out of favor. But a lot of times these lists are going to be bringing these multiple units of Gene Stealers like we're seeing here. The one thing that the double Hive Guard varieties often do is kind of create 2 independent castles, and then they instead of castling your army in a single place and trying to protect that, a lot of times you'll have kind of multiples of these units that can sit with the Hive Guard. So we have the two babysitter warrior units with bioweapon bond, and the 2 Gene Stealer units who can screen for them essentially. Now the downside I find with these styles of list is that once you are essentially, if you have a single unit of Hive Guard, you can concentrate your buffs on that single unit pretty effectively. Especially in a Leviathan detachment like this list is, you can, +1 to hit them, exploding sixes them, double tap them, full rerolls them, and that's kind of the level of damage output that people expect out of Hive Guard. So anytime someone online is complaining like, you have 3 units of Hive Guard, they're so broken, they all deal so much damage. Realistically, only the first unit deals a lot of damage. So as soon as you have multiple units of Hive Guard, there's very diminishing returns on the subsequent units that you have. The second unit is going to deal less than half the damage of the first unit. It's significantly less than half. Full rerolls, exploding sixes is it's essentially around a 30% damage spike, and then you're double tapping that unit. So that just compounds the additional damage you're dealing with them, which means the second Hive Guard unit is significantly less powerful. Now, obviously, having indirect fire battle cannons is still very good, and I'm never going to say that Hive Guard units aren't in and of themselves very good, but the second unit is not as good as the first unit. You also run into the issue with 2 units of Hive Guard that your game plan starts revolving significantly around the Hive Guard. I do appreciate that this list does have some other things going for it. It has the 2 Gene Stealer units, which gives you a little bit of flexibility. It has the Exocrine, so if the Hive Guard go down, you do still have a shooting attack, which is strong. And I love this little guy back here. Is a Trigon in this particular list. With Murderous Eyes on the Trigon, you can actually deal significant damage with them. And if you have an HQ or a Synapse unit with a ranged attack, it doesn't look like we have. You can actually buff his charge out of Deep Strike. So it's an 8-inch charge with Adrenal Glands out of Deep Strike, and if you deal a wound to something, or you already have a Synapse creature in melee with them, which we can potentially pull off with the Swarmlord, the Trigon can come up and roll 3d6 and drop the lowest for his charge. So you can actually Deep Strike the Trigon pretty effectively and fight with it. But the issue that I found with multi-Hive Guard versions is that once your opponent sort of gets into the castle, you have very little recourse, because a lot of your points are going towards supporting those Hive Guard. It's not just the points of the Hive Guard. They're 270 points apiece, but then you also have the 2 units of Warriors, so that's another 132, so we're up to 700 points almost. You have the babysitter character. In this case, we have a Neurothrope to give them their rerolls and stuff like that. So we're up to 800 points essentially just to make these Hive Guard sing. And if your opponent can deal with them, you're playing 800 points down, and that's very difficult to come back from, which is a reason that I don't love the multi-Hive Guard varieties of Tyranids. I do think that the double Hive Guard version is going to be a little bit more flexible than potentially the all-in version, the triple Hive Guard version, because you'll still have enough points left over to do other stuff rather than just be pushing with Hive Guard as much as possible. So I would put the double Hive Guard version probably somewhere in this range. It's very good, but I think it's a little bit too inflexible. And I think a lot of times you'll find that the multi-Hive Guard varieties of Tyranids will win most of the time off the back of how strong Hive Guard are. But like 1 in 10 games, or 1 in 5 games, or once in a GT or once in a RTT or something like that, you'll run into an opponent who isn't that worried about Hive Guard. They have strong indirect fire, they go first with aircraft or something like that, and they just rip those important models off the table and you're done. That's it. GG. And that's no good. That feels bad, man. See if we're at triple Hive Guard next. We're talking about mid-range next. Let's actually, because we're on the same topic, let's talk about triple Hive Guard right now. In my opinion, and so far the stats have not supported me on this, we'll see if people start responding to Hive Guard and the power of Tyranids in the metagame right now, which I think they will. We're seeing a lot more Whirlwind Scorpii hit the table. In my opinion, triple Hive Guard requires some very, very specific circumstances to succeed. Manichima is the list that we have here. Took triple Hive Guard to US Open. And I think part of that was because the terrain is very conducive to triple Hive Guard. Not only did they have the US Open has this big bricks of obscuring terrain that you can hide 2 units of Hive Guard behind pretty safely, but they also have true line of sight blocking terrain, which means on those bases, which means you can actually get a little bit of extra distance out of your Hive Guard and not necessarily have to put them on the back edge of the table. If you don't have perfect terrain like that, triple Hive Guard is very difficult to make quite as efficient. Now, the problem of the Hive Guard hitting diminishing returns in multiple units gets compounded even more once you have 3 units of them. The first one gets, is going to get a lot of buffs and deal significant damage. The second one is going to deal slightly less damage, not get double tapped. The third one, not only is it third in line for getting all of those buffs, but on the flip side, or in addition, it also you're going to be running out of good positions to place them in. Obviously, the U.S. Open had good places to place the Hive Guard, but you're also going to be having to put them, farther and farther up the table because Hive Guard have big bases, and not only are they competing with each other for places to hide so they don't immediately die, but they also are competing with each other for places to place their units so that they can actually be in range of enemy targets. And if your opponent is able to just stay out of range of your Hive Guard units that are going to be shooting at them, you have basically 1,000 points of your army that does very little. So if your opponent has units that aren't necessarily affected by Hive Guard profiles, stuff like a Plague Burst Crawler can get shot by Hive Guard all day and doesn't take too much damage. Eventually it dies, but winning on 4s, -1 damage means that, especially without a Maleceptor, which is very difficult to fit into a list like this, those Hive Guard are having real trouble punching through a profile like that. Now, you can shore up a lot of the weaknesses with some of these other detachments, and one thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that we do have this Genestealer Cult detachment, which is in here mostly to protect against aircraft and alpha strikes, especially if you go second, because you can use those units and the blips that they can create with their stratagem to force your opponent 9 inches away from areas of your table so that they're not able to come in with things like aircraft or alpha striking infantry. And that's very powerful, but I think it's important to keep in mind that it's probably not a mechanic that's going to stick around. So going on to the future, I don't know if you're going to have the same level of safety from aircraft that this triple Hive Guard list does, and that's a little bit unfortunate for it. Now, obviously, you can only have 2 aircraft, but even so, if those aircraft are able to, if they're powerful enough to kill several Hive Guard, then your ability to respond to those aircraft units reduces dramatically because there's nothing else in the list that flies that can reach up. So if your Hive Guard die and you need to deal with an aircraft, you're out of luck. Which is one of the ways that running into triple Hive Guard can be really awkward for you. Now, I do appreciate Manny's list because I do think that he's squeezed so hard to get some additional sort of finesse units. We do have the big Devour Termagant unit in there. We have a couple units of Genestealers as well as a couple units of Termagants to just try as hard as we can to wrest control of primary objective scoring and give it a little bit more fight against infantry, especially with those Devour Termagants. One thing that Hive Guard can run into is that they only have 36 attacks with 3 units of Hive Guard, 48 if you're double tapping one of them, and you against like a super high model count. This is one of the few lists that doesn't do super well against super high model count, and the Devour Termagants shore that up a little bit. We also, I think, interestingly, have this in Manny's list anyway with the five man unit of Hive Guard right here, which I believe he's knocked one down to change the Wowie stands, so he ends up with Swarmlord as his last Wowie stand rather than another Hive Guard unit, which I think is pretty cool. It also gives you more control over the positioning of the unit because you aren't in you're in a 5 model coherency rather than a 6 model coherency, which means that it's more flexible where it places, and you can potentially use that one as the unit that gets redeployed with strategic adaptation to be aggressive. So either if you go second and your opponent can deal with Hive Guard, you can run it off the table. Or if you go first and you want to trade a unit, you can put a unit of 5 up, give them rerolls, double tap them, and try to get them in to hit something that could potentially deal with the other 2 units of Hive Guard. So I do think there's some interesting technology built into this list, but I think overall the inflexibility of the list is going to mean it's probably going to drop. You're going to find that it drops a lot of games, especially against good players who know how to deal with a list like this. And for that reason, I think we actually put it in the B tier here, in my opinion. And I'm happy to be proven wrong about this. If people come out of the woodwork with a bunch of triple Hive Guard lists and they end up being the best thing ever, I'm happy to admit that I'm wrong. I don't think the triple Hive Guard list is as good as everyone is worried about. Now, it is a little bit interesting. Now, every time I post a list somewhere or I go to a tournament or something, everyone's like, oh, only 1 unit of Hive Guard. What are you doing, buddy? You need 3 units of Hive Guard. I'm like, do I? Because that list did not win US Open. It had 1 bad turn to shooting, and then the list died because it had 1,000 points in artillery. And I think that's just going to happen to it, and I think that makes it significantly less consistent. Gone Carpet D tier, but it's so good at giving back pain. All right, so let's talk about the last 2 lists that we have in here. We'll go back 1. We'll talk about mid range. So this is, I think, essentially going to be the archetype of list that we are probably going to see most often come out of Tyranids going on to the future. This is kind of a catch-all. It's a Tyranid mid-range list, so that means that it's good at both melee and shooting. It can compete in every phase. So it's going to be the most flexible of Tyranid list. And that also means that over the course of a long event, it's going to be the most powerful because it has the best swath of good matchups. Now, I do think that there are some perennial issues with Tyranids that this sort of list runs into, and matchups that are kind of traditionally very bad for Tyranids are super bad for a list like this. That said, because this list tends to be more holistic in its focus, it tends to be have a pretty wide focus. You can oftentimes just play out of bad matchups, and that's something that we see fairly often. This one's from Robert Hawkins, who was in Onslaught GT, went 4-1, but obviously there are a bunch of different varieties of lists like this. I know almost any of the lists that we see John Lennon play over on Art of War, those almost all fall into a style of list like this, where you're typically built out of 1 to 2 units of Gene Stealers, big units of Gene Stealers, usually 12 plus. 1 to 2 big units of Termagants. This list actually doesn't have the big Termagant unit, which is a little bit different, but we do have 2 big warrior units, which is a little bit different. Sometimes you'll see warrior, like a large warrior unit as either a frontline or a backbone to the list, just as this big bulwark that's hard to kill, so that you're not just relying on Gene Stealers and Termagants to hold down objectives. This one has 2, so there you go. Usually there's 1 Hive Guard list, and then it's kind of sprinkle support to taste. This one has a Malanthrope and a Maliceptor. Sometimes you'll see one or the other. Sometimes you'll see both. Sometimes you'll see 1 or 2 big monsters in there. There is a support Hive Tyrant in here, with 2 sets of Devourers, as well as... This one is Scything Talons, interesting. Which is pretty cool. Not Rending Claws. We're going Scything Talons, which I don't hate. I like those. But obviously, we have 3 Psychers, a grand total of 4 Smites. So we have good Psychic Phase damage output. We have 2 Gene Stealer units in the Swarm Lord, so we have good melee damage output. We have the Hive Guard, and I guess in this case the Tyranid Warriors, although a little bit less so. So we have good ranged output as well. We can operate in every phase, and that's kind of the classic style of the list. Now, I think because this list is so flexible, and I think because it has a good matchup into the Drukhari Thick City list, the big Artists of the Flesh list that has -1 damage all over the place. And if you're bringing Gene Stealers and Devour Termagants, I think those units are very good in that matchup specifically. I think Tyranids actually have one of the better matchups into that new build of Drukhari. Which means I think that we're probably going to see it creep up as the metagame sort of evolves. We have one unit of Hive Guard, so we're not worried about splitting our focus onto multiple units of Hive Guard. And if you lose that Hive Guard unit, the game's not over. Whereas, you know, like I said before, if your opponent gets into the Hive Guard castle, if you have 2 or 3 Hive Guard units, a lot of times you've lost immediately. The game's over. Just give up. Not 100%. Some you can often still play that game out, especially with how powerfully Tyranids can control primaries. But because it's only one Hive Guard unit, your opponent gets there and kills it, and you're like, all right, I lost 300 points. We'll just put the bioweapon bond on one of these Genestealer units and go charge you. This list in particular, one thing I like about this one is we have an 8-man Ripper Swarm in here, an 8 base Ripper Swarm, which I think is cute as hell. Which is very good. But I do think that the flexibility of this list, especially in the hands of a good player, means that it's going to be the strongest one. It's probably also the hardest one to play. If you want kind of point and click adventure game, the list, a Hive Guard list is probably, or the double or triple Hive Guard list is probably pretty good for you. But just be prepared to get absolutely plastered in a lot of different matchups because your opponent is ready for you. This list has a much broader spectrum of good matchups. It doesn't crush your opponents. It doesn't crush like mid-tables opponents quite as hard as the double or triple Hive Guard list will, but it will play into a lot of different stuff really, really well. Chat, new Drukhari lists aren't really as bad as everyone keeps saying. You just have to adjust. I agree with that. I don't think they're unbeatable. It doesn't feel like released Drukhari, where like you lost the roll to go first and the game was over. You were just dead. But I do think that it requires a different approach to anti-armor that not every faction has access to. I think Tyranids are an exception to that. They do have good access to the ability to kill those units, but I think there are a lot of factions in the game that will struggle immensely with getting through mass damage reduction into mass damage ignore. I think that's the combination of those two abilities is very difficult to get through. When we've seen it, do well in the future. Obviously, Space Marines running Dreadnought spam is similar. It's a little bit different. They're a little bit less tanky, Space Marine Dreadnoughts, but obviously they shoot harder, so it's a little bit different of a animal. But I think the Drukhari list backs it up with enough melee stuff and objective secured infantry. There's a million racks in that list. A lot of times there's Trueborn or something like that backing up the front line of big Artists of the Flesh guys. So I think it's just totally a different style of list than we've had to fight against before. All right, speaking of point and click adventure games, we got Harridan. Now, one thing I was pretty happy to see is that the Harridan clan is expanding rapidly. Especially a couple weeks ago, or 2 weeks ago, we saw a bunch of Harridan lists start making some appearances in GTs, and they, for the most part, I believe all did pretty well. I think they were all 4-1 off the top of my head, if I remember correctly, which sounds pretty good. That's a good place to be for the first outing of a list archetype. We hadn't really seen Harridans in post-Octarius anyway. We haven't really seen Harridans getting played, but they sure are now. This one's from Andreas Holm, who I believe plays on Breaking Heads DE. And if I'm misremembering that, then I apologize. I apologize dramatically, but over here we won 4-1 at Westeros X. This is the first Harridan list that I saw last weekend do well, but a couple other ones did also do well that weekend. And I think it's pretty classic kind of Harridan style of list. This one's bringing a Maliceptor, which I think is cool. Shores you up a little bit if you go second in some matchups, because you can -1 strength to Harridan, and a lot of, especially if your opponent's relying on like las cannons or meltas to kill a Harridan, they will not kill a Dermic Symbiosis Harridan through -1 strength for the most part. Outside of like Retributors with full rerolls off Morphin Ball, those can maybe do it. Those can maybe do significant damage, but otherwise, you're going to have a tough time punching through that defensive stat line. Now, obviously, the other big benefit of the Harridan is that if we lose the roll to go first, like we talked about at the start, you can strategic reserve the Harridan, so he's not even in danger if your opponent has the potential to kill him. Now, the big thing that the Harridan does do, and one thing that we've talked about a little bit in these other list varieties, is it shores up most of the bad matchups that Tyranids have. Tyranids, in terms of profile matchups, Tyranids have a tough time dealing with tough long-range firepower, so specifically Toughness 8, friggin' sucks to deal with. Damage Ignore that you can't fight in melee also sucks. So things like a Plague Burst Crawler is a Tyranid player's absolute worst nightmare. Tyranids have almost no way to directly deal with that. A lot of, previously it was about like making your stuff cracking and running it across the table to engage them. And even then, you were trading models for your opponent, your stuff not getting shot for one more turn. Whereas a Death Guard army would be able to kill those guys really easily. Knights also were a problem for Tyranids. In the list, in the battle report I just talked about, 2 rounds of double tapping a Hive Guard plus putting all of the psychic powers into a Knight Atropos barely killed it after Swarmlord charged it. So it took, whatever that is, probably 1,000 points of a Tyranid army, 2 full rounds to kill a single knight. That was asking for it, essentially, and was killing a lot of the Tyranid models in response. So because Tyranids typically rely on relatively mid to low strength attacks, strength 7 and strength 8 is around where Tyranids exist. That toughness 8 breakpoint, it can be such a nightmare for the Tyranid faction. Harridan, on the other hand, doesn't give a shit about toughness 8. And he doesn't give a shit about long range either. So, Plague Burst Crawlers, enemy artillery, Imperial Guard artillery, some other stuff. I'm thinking enemy Hive Guard, that kind of stuff, or Volkite Contemptors, Relic Contemptors that are hiding behind a wall or something like that. The Tyranids can't really get access to. The faction doesn't have an easy way to deal with, and the Harridan is the easy way to deal with it. So that's the biggest upside of the Harridan list. And interesting mechanical interactions aside, things like overrunning off the table, stuff like that, even ignoring all of that, the Harridan just gives the faction an out to those kind of profiles that things like Hive Guard and things like Gene Stealers and things like these Devoured Termigates just have no way of interacting with. And the Harridan just comes in, he's like, no, don't worry, buddy, I got you, sweeps you off your feet with those big scything talons, and then shoots all of your opponents to death in one fell swoop. Good stuff. For that reason, I am going to put Harridan right at the top here. I'm not going to put him in front of mid-range, though. I'm actually going to put him afterwards. So he's either top of A here, better than multi-Hive Guard lists, 100%, or bottom of S. Now, the comparison between multi-Hive Guard lists and the Harridan is pretty similar. The multi-Hive Guard lists will deal more damage or more spread damage at a shorter range. And in both cases, you run into the issue where you have 700 to 800 points of your army sort of tied up in this single interaction, in this single way of dealing damage to your opponent's army. And that can be a problem. The difference is that the Harridan has outs for it and the Hive Guard don't. Let's say your opponent is able to get access to the Hive Guard. They're able to get flyers in there. They have fast infantry that can touch them. The Hive Guard just don't do anything. If you're not able to clear the Hive Guard with your other stuff before it goes to your shooting phase, you aren't doing anything like that. The Harridan has the option to strategic reserve itself if it goes second. So if your opponent does have the ability to kill it on turn 1, it can just leave. Hive Guard obviously can also do that, but the Hive Guard then come in off your table edge, and they typically rely on more buffs in order to deal more damage. So they don't really do much when they come back in, like they're moving and shooting and all that. On top of that, the Harridan can strategic reserve himself throughout the game, so you have the option to run off the table if things get hairy later. So it's difficult for your opponent to actually kill the Harridan. On top, in addition, the Harridan profile is just pretty difficult to get through for a lot of lists. He is himself toughness 8, so any other factions that have trouble with toughness 8 will also have trouble with the Harridan. He's -1 to hit from ranged attacks for the most part. He's a 5+ invulnerable save, can get a 5+ damage ignore from Catalyst, and doubles wounds from bracketing, so they actually have to basically kill him for his capabilities to be reduced at all. So, the amount of punishment that the Harridan takes before there you see any reduction in the amount of damage it deals, unlike a Hive Guard unit, is significantly more. So the reason that I think the Harridan is better than the Hive Guard list is because it can fight the targets that they can't, and it can respond to things that can fight it much more dynamically. I do still think it's like, it is still a little bit of a meme list. It's not quite as much of a meme as, you know, triple Hive Guard for sure. And it definitely isn't as much of a meme as it used to be back in the day when you would play a Harridan, and it was it was silly fun because it didn't have access to all of these abilities and force multiplication and defensive effects that it does now. There were a lot of situations previously where, you know, you rolled second against an Iron Strider gunline with a Harridan. He was just dead. But now that you can pull him off the table and you can play more of a finesse game, I think it's still real. There still obviously is the danger of running into a matchup that the Harridan's not good into and who can deal with him. I think the laundry list of matchups that the Harridan's not great himself into is shorter than the list that Hive Guard are bad into. Typically, it's mostly MSU style units, multiple small units, where your opponent has like a ton of units that are relatively resilient in and of themselves, and all of them deal a ton of damage. So that's specifically like Adeptus Sororitas is very difficult for a Harridan. Harlequins is very difficult for a Harridan. And anything that relies on really good invulnerable saves. So Grey Knights can be tough, although he does... being able to pour damage into Dread Knights is still very good, and I think he's still fine in that matchup. So you win some, you lose some over the Hive Guard with the Harridan, but I think the ability that the Harridan has to fight his bad matchups more dramatically than the Hive Guard has definitely puts him at the top of all these multi-Hive Guard lists. That said, the Harridan list still runs into more bad matchups, I think, than the mid-range list does. He just solves the bad matchups that the mid-range list would typically have. That's why you see a lot of the hallmarks of the mid-range list also show up in the Harridan list. Like we've got the Gene Stealers, we've got the do we have does this list have the Devourers in it? No, I don't think so. You can fit Devourers in these lists. This one doesn't tend to have it, but you've got the Gene Stealers, you've got the Swarm Lord for melee punch. This list actually has a Tyranid Prime. We've been seeing a lot of Tyranid Prime lists with those Gene Stealers, so that you push the damage output of the single Gene Stealer unit really up very aggressively, so you can use them to kind of trade up significantly. And this one actually has 2 units of Gene Stealers if you want to do that. So you can full reroll into Unchecked Ferocity, into Relentless Flurry to get the Tesseling 6s and just really melt somebody. Definitely gives the list a little bit more of an out into the Artist of the Flesh list, which the Harridan himself is a little bit of trouble with. But yeah, that's what I have to say about Tyranid lists, chap. Does anybody have any lists that you felt that I missed? I think would be a good question. I racked my brain for the Tyranid archetypes that I typically saw, and I looked down all of the archetypes, at least that we've seen since Octarius came out, and these were the 6 that I saw in tournaments. So obviously the mid-range list doing a lot of work, the Harridan list coming in a little bit later, and then we see kind of evolutions of the standard mid-range list into the 2 or 3 Hive Guard list. Nidzilla and Gant Carpet. Gant Carpet didn't really get much play, but I think it was still interesting to talk about the new interactions that you can use with it. The Nidzilla list, because Barbed Hierodules are still kind of in the zeitgeist, and especially Dimacrons. There's a lot of Dimacrons seeing play. They're not doing great, but a lot of lists have 1 or 2 Dimacrons, just has a little bit of a threat range, a little bit of a melee threat. That is one way you can deal with those long-range guns that we're talking about. The mid-range list not dealing well with is, you just have a Kraken detachment with a Dimacron in it, and you just yeet that dude into your opponent's face. So I go over 12 Carnifexes. We have the Nidzilla list over here is basically where the 12 Carnifexes would land into. Or it's not really a list that sees play that much though. So I also wish Carnifexes were good, chat. We did build some people talking about double Harridan lists. We built some double Harridan lists on stream a couple weeks ago. I don't think they were good, but man, that double Harridan list It's a lot of damage you can do with Harridans. You're just hoping to table your opponent for the most part. Dutch Jagger asking about Tyranids versus Necrons. Yeah, Nids usually have a pretty good time with Necrons. The Mortal Wound output's very good. Especially especially that you have the ability to like overkill units significantly, like especially with Relentless Flurry. It's basically just Relentless Flurry from those Leviathan detachments. There isn't even a chance that a warrior brick like bounces a Gene Stealer brick because you just Relentless Flurry and absolutely dirt them. So sometimes you would, as a Tyranid player, you would play that matchup and you were just hoping that your dice didn't crap out on you and give your opponent super good reanimates, especially if they were playing Relentless Conquerors and then they would just reanimate onto your objectives and take all your objectives, engage your Hive Guard, and the game was over. But now that Tyranids are much less mathematically swingy, I think the game is much easier for them in that matchup for sure. Oh yeah, it was 16 Ripper Swarms in the other list, chat. Let's pull it up here. Yeah, sorry, it got cut off really awkwardly by my text box. Yeah, so this is the header. So it's 1 unit of 8, and then another unit of 8. So 16 total Ripper Swarms. They are the cheapest wounds you can get in the Codex. If you're only worried about 1 damage weapons, Ripper Swarms are the most effective objective security you can put in. Which, to be fair, we just talked about how people were good at clearing hordes because they had a bunch of 1 damage attacks, and Ripper Swarms are pretty resilient to that. They have only 6+ armor, but the 6+ damage ignore out of Leviathan goes a long way on those guys. And they're only 4 points of wound. So if your opponent's trying to like chew through you with like lightning claws or something, his Ripper Swarm's just like, nah, get out of here. You can't even fight me. Any chance that Gargoyle and Bergson and Harridan is worth it? Now that we have an obstacle try for them. I don't think it is. I would say no. I know some people are playing with it. There was, I think, one Harridan list that went 4-1 that had gargoyles in it for the embarkation, and we've seen it before. Some people played it, but I don't really rate it personally because the gargoyles are very expensive. You can't necessarily get the objective secured on them in time because the turn they disembark, you can't put objective secured on them. You can't put objective secured on them in your opponent's phase. So you have to wait back. So you have to disembark them, move to an objective, survive your opponent's turn, have Synapse in range, and have the unit survive, which is difficult. It's very difficult. I do think gargoyles have like a little bit an extra lease on life thanks to that stratagem. Hive Mind Imperative is very good in that unit because they're huge. The physical footprint of the gargoyle unit is enormous, and they're very fast as well. So they can score you your engages. They can do your rods, and they can run and just contest 1 billion objectives all at once. I don't know if that's worth the 70 points for the unit, though. It's a very expensive unit. And it's a unit that if they, I guess if you're embarking them in a Harridan, it's not the end of the world because it probably won't die on turn 1. You can at least disembark them and then send the Harridan over to do his own thing. But they're very difficult to hide, and so they'll immediately get killed if your opponent like just levels anything at them. And it's 70 points. That's not it's not a Ripper Swarm, right? They have about close to the same level of defensive tech as a Ripper Swarm. So it's just a 3-man Ripper Swarm, but they cost twice as much. A Ripper Swarm is 9 wounds with a 6-up save. The Gargoyle unit's 10 wounds with a 6-up save. Obviously, it's 10 wounds distributed over 10 models, which is better, but for twice as many points. Sky Slasher Swarms, though. That's the future. Those guys are amazing. And a good list with a Hierophant. There was a list with a Hierophant, chat. Actually, in hindsight, the Hierophant list might actually have been the list I was thinking of with the Gargoyles. I'm going to see if I can find it for you, chap. Because I think it did 4-1 an event, which shocks me. But, you know, it is what it is. They did it. I think the Hierophant does need some house ruling to be made good. A Harridan, you can make a very, you know, it's questionable whether or not the Harridan's interaction with the long tablage deployment is how it works, how it's supposed to. It is not with a Hierophant. I do not believe that there is any way that a correctly assembled Hierophant is ever going to get to act on turn 1 in a long table edge deployment, which sucks. All right, let's see if I can find this list for you, chap. Give me 1 sec. I found a Harridan list. That's not it. Here, I'm on my BCP here, champ. See if I can remember the the name of this person. These are events that haven't happened yet. Is it? Are we here? No, that's a Dimacron list. This is fun. This is fun live streaming content. It was a GT, I believe. So many of these events have not been submitted. Are we here? Nope, that's a Hierodule list. Maybe it was earlier. I know I set my search to... Oh, a lot of events haven't been submitted because I was searching through December. That would do it. Dutch Digger had expected more Exocrines in this list. Everyone been praising the hell out of them. Probably not anymore, I imagine. Exocrines... Oh, no. BCP. Don't do this to me. No. BCP, why'd you crash? No. Exocrines were very good pre-Octarius. They got significant nerfs post-Octarius. So we are seeing a couple of them because, I mean, the range profile, especially if you're looking to kill like Space Marine infantry, is very good. But they are not amazing. They lost a lot. There's also some weirdness with the with their count to stationary strat. It doesn't like technically work. I don't know. I've talked about that a lot, so I don't know if we need to talk about it anymore. I was looking for everyone who had a good result with Tyranids. No. All right, I might call this. I might call this pretty soon, Chad. I can't find this Hierophant list. Is it this same event? No. Paul Hinderman, that's Garlum, who plays on our server. This is a Tyrannifex list, went 3 and 2, very nice. Ah, we found it, chats. Gavin Heritage from Scottish Takeover 9, 4 and 1 with Tyranids. Hierophant Bio Titan in the slot here. Murderous size on that guy. I think that pushes his 6 attacks at 7 damage now. Is that right? I believe it has the same weapon profile as the Harridan. Yeah. So they got a strength 11, AP 4, 7 damage. Unnecessary. So the downsides of the Hierophant, it has a very strange measurement rule. It doesn't hull measure. It footprint measures, which is mechanically just a fucking nightmare. And also means that placing it on top of terrain and stuff is very awkward. So you need like a large enough space, you know, this like 8 to 10 inch wide space that you can place it without its footprint going over any models or terrain. It does have the fly keyword, so you can go over terrain. That doesn't run into that issue, but it is only movement 10. So it's like 9 inches long. I think if you assemble it with its legs out, which means that if you like moving 10 inches means if you're base with a piece of terrain in the front, it's difficult to hop over it, and especially with charging, that'd be almost impossible. Harridans have the upside of having that bizarre, ridiculous, tiny base where they can like get into awkward situations. So I think that you run into issues with the Harridan where like in a lot of situations it will just be screened out by its physical mass. On top of that, it's way too big to fit into 10-inch deep deployment zones without giving up its first turn. So I almost wonder, I think in order for a Hierophant to be effective, I almost wonder if there were house rules involved. So I'm sorry, I wonder how often 7 damage actually matters. It matters against, we were just talking about Plague Burst Crawlers. It matters a lot against Plague Burst Crawlers. It's a big deal. There's a lot of 12 wounds and -1 damage. But it's also AP. Oh, you could Murderous the Lash Whips, I guess. Because it makes a bunch of additional attacks to the Lash Whips. Yeah, that makes sense. It gets the Strength 6 AP 2 damage with 10 additional attacks. That would probably be the way to go. Yeah, you just pick a weapon for the Murderous size, chap. 4 shots of Baneblade. Perfect. We've done it. We found a way. AP 4 on the primary weapons is a big deal, to be fair, chat. That means you're much more reliable at killing 3+ save stuff. Because the AP 3 means they save on 6s. So you run into the issue sometimes your opponent just like rolls 1 or 2 6s against a Harridan attack, and you're just like, fuck me, I guess. You got me. Rip. Travis Loads, which strat are you referring to in your comment there? Looking back in the chat a little bit here, chat. So I'm sorry, hesitancy is exocrines in events because of the strat. They're more friendly games, you can explain it, yeah. The exocrine strat, yeah. So the issue is that Games Workshop they changed how counting a stationary interacted with remaining stationary, or not having moved interacted with remaining stationary. So in the core rulebook, treats not having moved and remaining stationary as two different things. When you not having moved means you haven't been selected to move in the movement phase, because it's optional whether or not you select a unit to move in the movement phase. If you do so, that turns on abilities that trigger when you haven't moved. So the exocrine ability, for example, says when this unit hasn't moved, you get all these bonuses. The confusion is that units that have not been selected to move in the movement phase are treated retroactively as remaining stationary, but those two things aren't synonymous. Games Workshop thinks they are, and they fucked up. So what they did was they changed the exocrine count as stationary stratagem to count you as remaining stationary in the movement phase, not count you as not having moved. Previously, it counted you as not having moved, which meant that when you went to shoot, you didn't apply any of the effects that you would have from the movement phase. Because now it counts you as remaining stationary, it doesn't supersede any other movements that you did during that movement phase. So you let's say you moved an exocrine, right? You selected an exocrine to move, so it has moved in the movement phase. You move it 6 inches. It's made a normal move. Then you go ahead and count it as remaining stationary. It basically adds the effect of remaining stationary on top of the effects of having made a normal move. But because you made any type of move, it doesn't count as not having moved because you selected it in the movement phase, which means that its weapon ability does not trigger. Previously, it did trigger because the stratagem counted you as not having moved. It's very stupid. There's I don't even like enforce this rule to be played this way. And it I mean, I think it's clearly unintended, but I don't know. I don't feel comfortable playing it myself that way. Yeah. So I guess the core of the issue is that remaining stationary and not having moved are not the same thing. And the stratagem counts you as remaining stationary, where the ability counts you as not. The ability requires you to not move, and those are two separate things. Remaining stationary is a type of movement that you do during the movement phase. It's very stupid. Yeah, honestly, like, if you went to your tournament organizer and you said, hey, this is how the rules as written work, but clearly the rules is intended as something else, can I play it this way? I bet 99% of tournament organizers would let you do that. Hell, I'd let you do that. I don't really feel comfortable doing it myself, because it very clearly requires a house rule, and I don't love that stuff. How could they fix that if they FAQ it? So here's the issue, chat. Here's the part that blows my fucking mind. It worked previously. They FAQ'd it, so it did not work. They changed the stratagem so it counted you as having remained stationary rather than having not moved. What the fuck? So literally all they have to do is erase that section of the FAQ. Shuma, can you count your execution as remaining stationary? Yes. Yes. I'm with you. Yeah, so that was like the second debuff to the exocrine for sure. Yeah, the other one is that the Symbiostorm triggers on modified 6s, not unmodified 6s, which is good because Bioweapon Bond would have triggered it on 5s, and that would have been broken as hell. So I'm glad that we didn't see that change. But that's the other reason you don't see exocrines quite as much, is because they used to explode on 5s when you would Symbiostorm them, and they give themselves +1 to hit, and that was very good. They would hit, on average, 14 out of their 12 shots, which is pretty sweet. The best Tyranid list is the one that you play in your next game? I hope so. The one I played, I did play a game this morning, and that list was not good. I got destroyed. What is the chance of a Tyranid army list with a shit ton of infantry being a viable option in the future? We did talk about that. I think it's something. I think it's going to be fun. I'll try it at some point. I think it'll be interesting. I don't think it's very good. I think it's mechanically a little bit too awkward. Basically, if you dump Relentless Flurry and all of these buffs onto any one of these large Gaunt units, big 30-man Hormigaunt, big 30-man Devourer Termagant, they do ridiculous damage. The problem is that you can only like focus those buffs on one thing per turn, essentially, which makes things a little bit awkward. We did talk about Dimacrons, chat. We talked about Dimacrons when we talked about Nidzilla. All right, champ. I think I'm gonna go ahead and call it a stream there. I think this is a good one. It's a good little discussion that we had, everybody. If anyone has any more questions, go ahead and throw them in chat before we wrap things up. I will be live. I have to submit a list for Alpha League tomorrow, so I'm gonna be live tomorrow playing some more games. I've been playing some games in throughout the previous week. I've been playing a lot of experimental lists, and I'm
I'm still looking for a list to call my own, to call my home. I'm trying to move forward the Harridan list. It's been a little bit awkward. I think the Harridan list right now is super good. It's tough to find any good places for any future iterations, but I've been playing with a bunch of different lists. So I'm going to be playing tomorrow at the very least. I might play every day this week, to be honest. So head on over to Twitch, twitch.tv/tacticaltortoisetv, and give me a follow there. I'm going to be streaming a whole bunch. If you're not in the Discord, I ping the Discord as well. Jump in the Discord. We can continue the discussion there if we want. ! Discord in the chat. We'll get you over there. Also, boom. Here's a Black Templar's Army box. Win one. Do it. ! Giveaway in the chats. We're giving away 2 of these guys. And so if you have if you want to join to do that, there's a bunch of different ways you can enter. So get that going. All right. Anyway. Chronic McKenz. Mechanically, it might be awkward to make a video on this. I'm actually appreciated. It's a very lore-heavy Tyranid player. Yeah, I'll probably give it a go at some point, and see if it goes. See if it works out. It might be okay. I don't know. I think it'll be fun. If you're looking for a fun list, I bet a Gant carpet would be super fun. Yeah. Anyway. So yeah, today's the last day to enter that giveaway, chat. So if anybody's not in the giveaway, get on in there. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and wrap up pretty shortly here. Well, thanks everybody for watching. I really appreciate it. I'm getting underway with the new digs. You might be able to see it in the camera a little bit in the corner here. I got new shelves up. They got all my Tyranids on them right now. That's pretty cool. But slowly but surely, we're moving to get some new in-person live streaming going. Anyway, show what's in the closet. It's a doorway, actually. Goes to a whole new room. A whole new room. So very exciting. Super exciting. All right, chat. I'm gonna go ahead and close it out there. Thanks everyone for watching. I appreciate it. I'm sure we'll have some videos coming out later this week. I'm not sure what those are gonna be though, chat. I've been very bad at planning this week, but I'm definitely gonna be playing another tournament this weekend. We'll do another discussion stream probably next Monday as well. So hang out with that. And yeah, cheers everybody.